Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Invitation to the Country. It was a damp, grey Thursday morning in London when Hercule Poirot received the letter that would draw him into one of the most curious cases of his later career. He was seated at his small but perfectly arranged breakfast table, the silver cutlery gleaming, the eggs boiled for exactly 3.5 minutes, and the toast cut into even triangles, 2 on each side of the dish, forming a pleasing symmetry that satisfied his passion for order. Across from him, Captain Hastings was reading the newspaper with the benignly distracted air of a man who reads more for comfort than enlightenment. He looked up now and then to make a remark about the cricket scores, but Poirot, who had little interest in English games, merely nodded with a polite smile. "Mon ami," said Poirot suddenly, lifting a small, cream-coloured envelope from his place setting, "observe, if you please. The paper is of fine quality, the ink a shade too dark for ordinary correspondence, and the handwriting, elegant, slanted, yet tremulous. It is a lady's hand, and one who is accustomed to command." Hastings smiled indulgently. "You can tell all that before even opening it." "But of course. It is the science of deduction, Hastings. One does not require to read a letter to know the character of the one who writes it." But he delicately slit the envelope with a small silver knife. "Let us see if my little grey cells are correct." He unfolded the letter carefully and read it through once, then a second time, his fine eyebrows lifting ever so slightly. Finally, he set it down. "It is from Lady Winthrop," he announced. Hastings frowned in thought. Winthrop, the name rings a bell. Didn't her husband serve in Parliament some years ago? Exactment. Sir Reginald Winthrop, now deceased. His widow resides at Thornleigh Manor, in Hampshire. She invites me for the weekend, ostensibly to celebrate her birthday, but, Poirot tapped the letter lightly, "there is more between the lines, mon ami. Listen. My dear Monsieur Poirot. Forgive the boldness of a lady who has not had the pleasure of your acquaintance in recent years. I write not only to invite you to my little gathering at Thornleigh Manor this weekend, but to request a word in private on a matter of a delicate and distressing nature. I fear something most unpleasant may occur if it is not handled with care. Your discretion and skill are my only hope. Yours sincerely, Lady Beatrice Winthrop." Poirot looked up with interest shining in his eyes. "A delicate and distressing matter, you see, Hastings? That is the true reason for this invitation. She suspects, perhaps, some danger within her household." Hastings shrugged. "Or perhaps she merely wishes to show off having the famous Hercule Poirot as a guest of honor." Poirot smiled modestly. "It is possible. But I do not think so. The phrasing, Hastings, it is anxious, not vain. I shall accept. The instincts of Hercule Poirot, they tell him there is mischief afoot." 2 days later, under a sky heavy with November mist, Poirot and Hastings found themselves travelling through the quiet Hampshire countryside in a hired motor car. The hedgerows were bare, the fields soft with rain, and the air held that melancholy scent of damp earth that seems peculiar to the English shires. "Country air, Hastings," Poirot murmured, drawing his scarf tighter. "They say it is invigorating. I find it only damp and inconvenient." Hastings chuckled. "You'll soon change your mind when you see Thornleigh Manor. It's one of the loveliest estates in the county." As the car turned a final bend, the house came into view. A large, grey-stoned manor, its windows gleaming faintly in the dull afternoon light. Behind it rose a cluster of tall elms, their bare branches swaying gently in the wind. A gravel drive swept up to an entrance flanked by carved lions, and the faintest trace of lilac perfume drifted in the air. "Voila," murmured Poirot. A fine setting for tragedy. Hastings laughed, thinking it a jest. Poirot merely smiled. Inside, they were greeted by Lady Winthrop herself, a tall woman of commanding presence, though her face bore the weariness of one who has lived too long with secrets. She was dressed in soft grey silk, her silver hair swept into a graceful knot. "Monsieur Poirot," she said warmly, "how good of you to come. I have heard so much of your brilliance from friends in London." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madam, it is an honour. You are most gracious. And this is Captain Hastings, I believe." "Entirely at your service, Lady Winthrop," said Hastings, bowing in his turn. "Come in, both of you. The others have arrived already. You must be tired from your journey." She led them through the great hall, its walls lined with portraits and the faint ticking of a long case clock echoing in the air. Poirot's eyes moved rapidly over the surroundings, the polished banister, the scatter of footprints on the carpet, the faint scent that lingered. It was the same lilac perfume he had noticed outside, but mingled with something else. Something acrid, metallic, almost bitter. He paused briefly, then continued on. The drawing room was cheerful with firelight. There, Lady Winthrop introduced her guests, her son Charles, a handsome man in his 30s with restless eyes and a strained smile, her niece Vera Drayton, quiet, composed, and pale, the local vicar, Reverend Cole, genial and round-faced, the family physician, Dr. Selby, whose shrewd eyes missed little, and finally Madame Lefevre, a visiting French perfumer whose presence, Poirot soon gathered, had caused more than a little flutter in the household. Madame Lefevre was a striking woman, dark-haired, elegant, with a voice like velvet and a faint scent of jasmine about her. She greeted Poirot in her native tongue, and for a brief moment the two conversed in rapid French, much to the fascination of the assembled company. Dinner that evening was a pleasant affair, outwardly at least. Yet Poirot's finely tuned instincts detected the undercurrents beneath the polite conversation, the quick glances exchanged between Charles and Madame Lefevre, the tense silence that occasionally fell upon Lady Winthrop, and the way Vera Drayton seemed perpetually on the edge of speaking yet never quite daring to. At one point, Lady Winthrop turned to Poirot with a small, weary smile. "You must forgive us, Monsieur Poirot. Country life is dull company compared to your world of intrigue." "On the contrary, madam," Poirot replied gently. "Wherever there are human hearts, there is intrigue. One need only look closely." After dinner, while the others drifted toward the card table, Lady Winthrop drew Poirot aside near the fire. Her voice was low. "Monsieur Poirot, you must forgive me for imposing on your leisure. But I am uneasy. There is tension in this house. My son, he has changed. He speaks little to me now. There are debts, rumors, and that Frenchwoman," she hesitated, "I fear she has some hold over him." Poirot regarded her kindly. "You believe she is dangerous?" "I cannot say. But there is something wrong here, Monsieur Poirot. Something in the air, like a scent one cannot name but knows to be unpleasant." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Then you are most wise to trust your instincts, madam. The nose, it does not lie." As the evening drew to a close and Hastings prepared to retire, Poirot lingered a moment longer by the fire. His gaze travelled around the room, the flicker of the flames reflected in the glass cabinets, the faint rustle of silk as Madame Lefevre passed behind him, the faint trace of that same bittersweet perfume once more. He smiled to himself, softly, almost sadly. "There is indeed something in the air, Hastings," he murmured. "And it is not the scent of lilacs alone." Chapter 2, The Fragrance in the Library. The morning dawned pale and misty over Thornleigh Manor. The countryside lay hidden beneath a fine white veil, and the great lawns were glistening with dew. From the window of his guest room, Hercule Poirot surveyed the scene with faint disapproval. "Mon Dieu," he muttered, drawing the curtains closed again, "this English weather, it is like a damp hand upon the spirit." It offends my sense of order." Hastings, already half-dressed and cheerfully whistling, laughed. "Come now, Poirot, it's a beautiful morning. Smells fresh after the rain." Poirot raised a delicate eyebrow. "To you, perhaps. To me, it smells of wet wool and mildew. But no matter, Hastings. The country, it is good for observing the human animal in its natural habitat. There are fewer distractions here, one sees more clearly." He straightened his tie before the mirror, adjusted his moustaches with care, and then, with his usual brisk precision, led the way down to breakfast. Lady Winthrop was already seated at the long dining table, a newspaper in hand. She looked a little tired, though she greeted Poirot and Hastings with her customary grace. "Good morning, gentlemen. I trust you slept well." "As the blessed infant," said Poirot, seating himself. "And you, madam?" "A restless night," she admitted. "The wind howled dreadfully. Still, we must be grateful for another day." The remark, though innocuous, carried a faint note of melancholy. Poirot noticed it, as he noticed everything. One by one, the other guests appeared. Charles Winthrop entered last, his expression sour. He nodded curtly to his mother but said little. Beside him, Madame Lefevre looked radiant in a pale green gown, her dark eyes bright with energy. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," she exclaimed. "Do you find our English countryside charming?" "It is so, peaceful, n'est-ce pas?" "Perhaps a little too peaceful, madam," replied Poirot dryly. A laugh rippled around the table, though Lady Winthrop's smile did not quite reach her eyes. After breakfast, the household dispersed. Hastings went to inspect the gardens, Dr. Selby was summoned to the village on a medical matter, and Lady Winthrop retired to her study to deal with correspondence. Poirot, however, wandered idly through the house, his eyes everywhere, his mind quietly absorbing detail. The library soon drew his attention, a fine, oak-panelled room filled with the scent of polished wood and old books. A fire burned low in the grate, and a writing desk stood near the window, littered with letters and envelopes. He leaned forward slightly, examining a small glass vial lying upon the desk. It was stoppered, its contents a clear liquid with a faint blue sheen. Beside it was a neatly folded handkerchief, faintly scented with jasmine. "Curious," murmured Poirot. "A perfume not English, but Parisian. A note of heliotrope, and something sharper beneath. Ah, Madame Lefevre, I think we smell your handiwork." He made no move to touch the vial, merely noted its position with precision before withdrawing quietly. The morning passed uneventfully until, shortly before 11, a sharp, piercing cry echoed through the corridor. Poirot and Hastings, who had been conversing in the morning room, started to their feet at once. "Good heavens!" exclaimed Hastings. "What was that?" "The voice of a woman, and in distress," said Poirot, already moving swiftly towards the source. They reached the library within moments. The door stood ajar, and the housemaid, young Mary, was standing just inside, white as paper and trembling violently. "Sir, madam, oh, God, she's dead," the girl stammered. On the carpet near the writing desk lay Lady Winthrop. Her body was slumped forward in the chair, one arm hanging limp, her head resting sideways as if she had fallen asleep. But the stillness of her face, the peculiar bluish tinge of her lips, told a different story. The shattered remains of the small glass vial glimmered on the rug beneath her hand. Poirot moved forward softly, his expression grave. "Do not touch anything," he said quietly. "Hastings, close the door, if you please." He knelt beside the body, examining it with delicate precision. Lady Winthrop's eyes were half open, her expression strangely peaceful, yet around her mouth there lingered a faint trace of foam. He lifted the edge of the handkerchief that lay on the desk, it was damp, and the smell of jasmine rose sharply. But beneath the sweetness, another odour made itself known, bitter almonds. Poirot's nostrils flared slightly. "Ah," he murmured. "Cyanide. The perfume of death." Dr. Selby was summoned at once. He confirmed what Poirot already suspected. "It looks like heart failure at first glance," he said gravely. "But these signs, the colour, the pupils, I fear it's poisoning. And that vial, it contained some chemical substance, I'd wager." Poirot nodded slowly. "Indeed, Doctor. Methyl cyanide, if I am not mistaken. A rare but deadly poison, often used in the manufacture of perfumes. Lethal in the smallest quantity." Madame Lefevre gasped. "Impossible. I have such substances, yes, but they are safely locked away in my room. I would never, never, leave them where anyone might come to harm." Her distress seemed genuine, though Poirot's sharp eyes caught the flicker of fear in Charles Winthrop's face as she spoke. "Lady Winthrop was alone in this room all morning," Charles said quickly. "If she touched something poisonous, it was by her own doing. She had been very troubled lately." Poirot turned to him. "You believe she took her own life, monsieur?" Charles hesitated. I don't know. She seemed agitated. But she was not a woman to," he broke off helplessly. Poirot's gaze moved to the desk once more. "This letter, unfinished." He pointed to a half-written note lying beside the blotter. "My dear Charles, I can no longer," and then it ends. Interrupted, perhaps. Or cut short. He regarded the room in silence for a long moment. The broken vial. The open window. The faint scent that hung heavy in the air, too strong to be natural. At last he straightened, brushing an invisible speck from his sleeve. "No, Hastings. It is not suicide. The symmetry, it is wrong." Inspector Finch of the Hampshire Police arrived by mid-afternoon, a competent man, though inclined to impatience. He questioned the household thoroughly, his tone brisk, his manner official. "Seems clear enough," he declared after hearing the first accounts. "The poison came from Madame Lefevre's bottles. The lady must have mixed it into her scent by mistake, or, if we must consider foul play, someone may have used it deliberately." "You're sure, Monsieur Poirot, that the smell is cyanide?" Poirot inclined his head. "Most certain. The odour of bitter almonds is unmistakable. Yet one must be careful not to jump to conclusions. Appearances, they are the enemy of truth." Finch snorted. "Well, we'll see what the coroner says. In the meantime, I'll have everyone stay on the premises." As the inspector went about his duties, Poirot stood quietly by the window, his keen eyes lost in thought. Outside, the mist had thickened, wrapping the garden in ghostly folds. At length, Hastings came to his side. "A dreadful business, Poirot. But what do you think?" "Madame Lefevre seems the obvious suspect." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, Hastings, always you leap like a fine English foxhound. But sometimes, mon ami, the scent that seems strongest leads only in circles. We must observe. We must listen. Every little detail, every word, it will tell us what happened here." He turned back toward the desk. "You see, Hastings, the good lady was writing. A letter unfinished, a perfume spilled, a window open though the day was cold, these are not accidents. The dead woman wished to reveal something. She began to speak, but death interrupted her." He bent over the writing again, murmuring softly, "My dear Charles, I can no longer," what was it she could no longer do? Forgive? Conceal? Protect? He straightened at last, his eyes narrowing. "No, mon ami. This was not the hand of despair. It was the hand of murder." Chapter 3: The Circle of Suspicion. Inspector Finch took charge of the household with the stiff determination of an Englishman doing his duty under unpleasant circumstances. By afternoon, the atmosphere in Thornleigh Manor had shifted entirely. The chatter and polite civility of the previous evening were replaced by whispers, glances, and the uneasy silence that always follows sudden death. Poirot, calm and immaculate as ever, moved about the rooms like a small grey shadow, observing without haste, saying little. Hastings followed him, notebook in hand, though not entirely certain what he was meant to note. "Everyone's terrified," Hastings whispered as they entered the drawing room. "I can't blame them. Finch is treating the place like a police station." Poirot smiled faintly. "That is because, mon ami, the English police, they do not understand the psychology of the criminal. They march in, they shout their questions, they count the bottles, they measure the footprints, and they forget that murder, it begins here." He tapped his temple. "In the little grey cells." He walked to the fireplace and studied the portrait above it, an austere painting of Sir Reginald Winthrop, Lady Beatrice's late husband. "A strong face," Poirot murmured. "Yet, I think, not a kind one. A man of authority, perhaps of temper." Hastings blinked. "What has he to do with this, Poirot? He's been dead 10 years. Everything, mon ami, is connected. The past, always it leaves its fingerprints on the present. Let us see which prints remain." At Inspector Finch's invitation, or perhaps his resignation, Poirot began to assist with the questioning of the household. The library was chosen for the purpose, the same room where Lady Winthrop had died. The faint scent of jasmine still lingered there, though Poirot had requested that the window remain open to clear the air. Even so, the ghost of Perfume clung obstinately to the curtains, as though unwilling to depart. The first to be questioned was Charles Winthrop. He entered stiffly, his face drawn, his hair dishevelled. His hands trembled slightly as he took a seat opposite the desk where his mother had died. Poirot regarded him with sympathetic eyes. "You are much distressed, monsieur." "Naturally so." Charles gave a bitter laugh. "Who wouldn't be? It's damnable. My mother gone, and in such a way." Poirot nodded gravely. "You were close to her." Charles hesitated. "As close as any son can be, I suppose. We had our differences. She had strong opinions." "Ah, yes. And perhaps strong knowledge also," Poirot said softly. "It is possible she discovered something that troubled her." Charles looked sharply at him. "What are you implying?" "Implying? Nothing. I merely ask, had she enemies?" "Enemies?" He gave a strained smile. "No. My mother ruled this house like a queen. People might resent her, yes, but they feared her more than they hated her. Even within the family." Charles's expression hardened. "If you mean my cousin Vera, she had no reason to harm my mother. She stood to gain nothing." "Perhaps not," murmured Poirot. "And yet, sometimes one kills not for gain, but for release, from humiliation, from power, from silence." Charles stared at him. "You talk as though everyone is capable of murder." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Everyone, monsieur, is capable. The question is only, what is the reason?" He rose. "Merci, monsieur. That will be all for now. But one last question, where were you this morning, between 10 and 11? "In the gardens," said Charles quickly. "I went out to clear my head." Poirot's gaze dropped to the man's shoes, fine leather, caked with dried mud. "In the gardens? Then why, I wonder, are your soles thick with earth from the orchard path, and not with gravel from the terrace?" Charles flushed. I took a walk farther out. Toward the woods." Ah, I see. A long walk indeed. Poirot bowed slightly. Thank you, monsieur. You may go. As Charles left, Hastings leaned closer. You think he's lying, Poirot? Poirot's eyes glimmered. I think, Hastings, that he walks not only in the garden but also on dangerous ground. Next came Vera Drayton. She entered quietly, her manner reserved, her face pale but composed. She wore a simple black dress, though her eyes were red-rimmed. I cannot believe she is gone, she said softly. Aunt Beatrice was formidable, yes, but she was kind in her way. She looked after me when my parents died. Poirot inclined his head. And yet, perhaps, she looked after you too well, n'est-ce pas? She was a woman who liked to control. Vera gave a faint, humorless smile. Yes. She could never resist arranging other people's lives. Especially Charles's. She spoiled him. Ah. And did she spoil you also? Vera hesitated. She tried to. But I am not easily spoiled. I have little taste for wealth, Monsieur Poirot. I only wanted peace. Poirot studied her. Peace, such a rare thing in this house, I think. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you know that Lady Winthrop was writing a letter at the time of her death? Vera's eyes flickered. A letter? Yes. It began, "My dear Charles, I can no longer," and then it ended abruptly. You have no idea what she meant to write? No. None at all. She spoke too quickly. Poirot noticed it. He also noticed how her fingers clenched together on her lap, white against the fabric. You will forgive me if I ask, he continued, but were there any financial matters between yourself and Lady Winthrop? I was not her heir, if that's what you mean, Vera said quietly. Charles inherits almost everything. My aunt's will was drawn up long ago. Poirot nodded. I see. Unless, of course, she had reason to change it. A shadow crossed Vera's face, but she said nothing more. When she had gone, Hastings exhaled. Poor girl. She looked genuinely upset. Poirot tilted his head. Grief is an interesting emotion, Hastings. It may conceal guilt, or it may conceal nothing at all. One must watch how it changes from day to day. Finally, Madame Lefevre entered. She carried herself with the poise of a woman who is used to being admired. Even now, her dark hair was flawless, her eyes bright. Yet Poirot detected the faint tremor in her hands as she adjusted her gloves. I understand, she began, that you and Inspector Finch suspect my profession. Because I work with chemicals, you think I bring death wherever I go. Poirot smiled kindly. Ah, madam, not at all. It is not you who brings death, but perhaps one who used your art as a disguise. I make perfumes, not poisons, she said fiercely. I did give Lady Winthrop a small vial yesterday evening, a sample of my new fragrance. I called it Larmes du Ciel, Tears of Heaven. It contained nothing dangerous. And yet, said Poirot softly, it is this same vial which lay broken at her feet. How do you explain that? Madame Lefevre's face went still. I cannot. But I swear to you, I would never harm that poor woman. Poirot nodded gently. I believe you, madam. Still, I must ask, who else knew of this perfume? Did you show it to anyone? She hesitated. To Charles, perhaps. He asked about it last night after dinner. He said the name was rather dramatic. Poirot's expression did not change, though a spark lit his eyes. Ah, yes. Rather dramatic. A phrase that may describe much about this case. As evening fell, the house grew quiet. Finch had retired to his room to write his report. Hastings paced the corridor restlessly. Poirot remained alone in the library, the fire casting long shadows upon the floor. He bent once more over the desk, examining the half-finished letter. With delicate care, he lifted the blotter and held it to the light. The faint impression of other writing was visible, lines pressed through from a sheet above. "Curious," he murmured. "A letter, perhaps, that was removed. Or hidden." He drew out his magnifying glass and studied the marks. One word stood faintly visible: Inspector. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah! So she was indeed writing to the police. That changes everything. He replaced the blotter and stood very still. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, and somewhere down the corridor, a clock struck 9. Poirot smiled to himself. "The circle tightens, Hastings," he said softly. "There are 6 people in this house, and one of them wears the perfume of death." Chapter 4: The Hidden Letter. The following morning dawned pale and windless, as though the manor itself held its breath. A faint fog still lingered across the lawns, blurring the edges of the trees and making the world seem ghostly, suspended. Inside Thornleigh Manor, the servants moved in hushed tones, their footsteps muffled, their eyes downcast. Breakfast was a strained affair. The same table that had been bright with laughter 2 days earlier was now a stage of silence. Madame Lefevre sat rigidly upright, stirring her tea though she never drank it. Charles Winthrop smoked one cigarette after another, his movements sharp and jerky. Vera Drayton kept her gaze on her plate, barely touching her food. Inspector Finch presided at the end of the table like a magistrate in a court. His notebook lay open beside his cup. "You will all be pleased to know," he announced in a tone suggesting quite the opposite, "that the coroner has confirmed poisoning by methyl cyanide. We found traces in what remains of the vial. We're sending it to London for chemical verification." No one spoke. Poirot, seated beside Hastings, merely nodded thoughtfully. Finch went on, "It's a rare substance, not easily obtained. Madame Lefevre, you're the only one who admits to possessing such chemicals. I'll have to ask for the key to your laboratory case." "Of course," said Madame Lefevre coldly, producing a small brass key from her pocket. "You may search as you please, Inspector. You will find nothing." Finch pocketed it. "Thank you, Madam. I intend to take you at your word." After breakfast, the guests dispersed, each retreating into solitude. Finch left to conduct his search. Hastings wandered out to the garden for air. Poirot, however, slipped quietly toward the library, the room where Lady Winthrop had met her death. The faint scent of jasmine still clung to the curtains despite the open window. The desk was exactly as Finch had left it, papers stacked neatly, pen beside the inkwell. Poirot's eyes roved over every surface. He touched nothing at first, merely studied. Then, bending low, he noticed a faint mark upon the carpet, a small crescent stain where the vial had shattered. He knelt beside it, examining the fibers with care. "Ah," he murmured. "The poison was spilled here, yet not upon her hands. That is interesting, n'est-ce pas?" He straightened, his gaze falling once more upon the writing desk. There lay the half-finished letter, "My dear Charles, I can no longer." Poirot lifted it delicately between gloved fingers and studied it in the light. Then, with the precision of a man arranging chess pieces, he began to remove each item from the desktop one by one, the blotter, the paperweight, the stack of correspondence. He examined the surface beneath each. Nothing. Yet something in the arrangement troubled him, a faint irregularity in the dust upon the writing board, as though something small and square had lain there until recently. He ran a fingertip along the edge. The dust formed a clean outline. "ABN," he said softly, "something was here, something that is now gone." "But what?" Hastings entered at that moment, cheeks flushed from the cold air. "There you are, Poirot." Finch is in quite a state. He's found nothing in Madame Lefever's room except a locked trunk of perfume bottles. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, the good inspector, he hunts the fox while the hare hides beneath his chair. Come, Hastings, let us think. If one wished to conceal a letter quickly, where might one hide it in this room? Hastings looked around. Drawer? Fireplace? Behind a book? Too obvious, said Poirot. No, no. The clever criminal hides in plain sight. He bent over the writing desk again, his eyes narrowing. Then, with a small cry of satisfaction, he lifted the leather blotter and examined the underside. A corner was slightly frayed, and there, pressed flat against the wooden board beneath, was a folded sheet of paper, sealed with red wax. Voila, said Poirot softly. The dead woman speaks. He removed the letter carefully and examined the seal. The initials B.W., Beatrice Winthrop, were pressed into the wax. The envelope was addressed, in her own hand, to Inspector Finch, Hampshire Constabulary. Hastings leaned closer, wide-eyed. Good heavens! She was going to write to the police. Not going to, Hastings. She did. Only she did not have time to send it. Poirot placed the letter on the desk but made no move to open it. You're not going to read it? Asked Hastings, surprised. Poirot shook his head. No. To read it now would be to destroy the rhythm of the investigation. We must first consider why it was hidden. That will tell us what it contains. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Poirot began pacing the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his head bowed in thought. Consider, Hastings. Lady Winthrop writes to the police. Why? Because she suspects wrongdoing. But she addresses it not to Scotland Yard, but to the local inspector, someone she must have intended to see soon. Therefore, the threat she feared was near at hand. In the house. Hastings nodded slowly. You think she suspected one of her guests? Or one of her family? The family, Hastings, they are the most dangerous of all. Strangers kill from impulse, relatives, from reason. He smiled faintly. Now, who could have hidden the letter? The murderer, of course. They searched her desk, found it, but, were interrupted. They had no time to destroy it, only to conceal it. At that moment, a sound came from the corridor, the faint creak of a floorboard. Poirot turned sharply, eyes glittering. He crossed to the door and flung it open. Standing there, hand half raised as if about to knock, was Vera Drayton. Oh, she exclaimed, startled. I beg your pardon. I was looking for you, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't mean to intrude. Poirot studied her face. You have good timing, mademoiselle. Always, you appear at the precise moment of interest. Her cheeks flushed. I assure you, it was by chance. I only wish to ask whether you think my aunt's death might have been deliberate. Poirot inclined his head gravely. It was no accident, mademoiselle. Of that I am certain. Her eyes widened. Then you believe one of us. I believe, said Poirot softly, that Lady Winthrop knew too much. And someone feared she would speak. Vera's hand trembled slightly against the door frame. Do you think I had reason to harm her? Poirot's expression did not change. Everyone in this house had reason, small or large. The question is only whose reason was strong enough to overcome conscience. He gestured toward the desk. Tell me, mademoiselle, have you ever seen this seal before? She leaned closer. It's my aunt's personal seal. She kept it in a drawer, there, on the left. Poirot opened the drawer. Empty. Curious, he murmured. It was used to seal this very letter, yet now it has vanished. He replaced the letter carefully. You see, Hastings, how even in death the lady keeps her secrets. But they will not remain hidden long. Vera hesitated, then said softly, she was afraid, Monsieur Poirot. I think she meant to change her will. I heard her mention it to Dr. Selby last week. She said she had discovered something shameful. Poirot turned sharply. Shameful? In her own family. Vera nodded. She didn't say more. Only that she could no longer protect someone she loved. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Mon Dieu? Then this letter, yes, yes. That is the key. Hastings, we are close. After Vera left, Poirot locked the letter safely in his pocket. He looked around the quiet room one last time, at the desk, the fire, the faint outline of dust where something had been moved. The murderer, Hastings, he said softly, made one mistake. They thought they could silence Lady Winthrop by killing her. But the dead, they speak in whispers, and Hercule Poirot, he listens. Outside, the fog began to lift from the gardens. A weak shaft of sunlight touched the window, glinting on the broken glass of the vial still lying near the hearth. Poirot smiled to himself, that small, satisfied smile Hastings knew too well. Yes, he murmured. Soon, the truth will reveal itself, like the faint scent of jasmine that lingers when all else has faded. Chapter 5, A Second Fragrance of Death. The day after the discovery of Lady Winthrop's hidden letter began with a deceptive calm. The autumn sunlight lay thinly across the lawns, and the frost glittered upon the hedges like powdered glass. Yet beneath that fragile peace, Thornleigh Manor pulsed with unease. Poirot rose early, as was his custom, and took a light breakfast alone. Hastings found him soon after, gazing thoughtfully from the window of his small guest room. You're unusually quiet this morning, Poirot, said Hastings. Still brooding on that letter? Poirot turned, his expression serene. My friend. Lady Winthrop tried to warn us, and now we must learn what she feared. The murderer believed that letter destroyed. That belief gives him courage, and courage, when misplaced, leads to error. Then you expect another attempt. Poirot smiled faintly. Expect? No, Hastings. I know. He sipped his tea, then added softly, the killer is clever, yes, but not clever enough to outwit Hercule Poirot. The day passed in uneasy routine. Inspector Finch, armed with Lady Winthrop's sealed letter, which Poirot had finally given him after much insistence, retired to the library to examine it under official supervision. Poirot himself requested a few hours' solitude to arrange his little grey cells. Meanwhile, the others, Charles Winthrop, Vera Drayton, Madame Lefevre, and the elderly Dr. Selby, moved through the house like restless ghosts. Their conversations were polite, brittle, and brief. By mid-afternoon, a heavy silence had fallen once again upon Thornleigh. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed louder. Then, just after 4, the calm shattered. A cry rang through the corridor, sharp, startled, and unmistakably human. Poirot and Hastings, seated in the parlour, sprang to their feet at once. Mon Dieu, exclaimed Poirot. That was Madame Lefevre. They rushed toward the sound. In the small breakfast room at the end of the corridor, Madame Lefevre lay slumped in a chair, her cup overturned, tea spreading across the white tablecloth like spilled ink. Her face was pale, her breath ragged. Quickly, Hastings! The doctor! Poirot knelt beside her, his eyes darting over the scene. A faint smell hung in the air, sweet, faintly bitter, and familiar. Within moments, Dr. Selby arrived, his bag in hand. He examined the unconscious woman swiftly. Poison again, he said grimly. The same symptoms, cyanide, I'd wager. But she's had a smaller dose. She may live. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes. The murderer grows bold, yet careless. He repeats his method, thinking to shift suspicion. Finch entered next, red-faced and alarmed. Good heavens! Not another one! Mise OUI, Inspector, said Poirot coolly. It appears that death is fond of repetition. Finch's eyes flashed. No one leaves this house until we get to the bottom of this. No one. An hour later, Madame Lefevre was resting under Dr. Selby's care. Her breathing had steadied, though she remained weak and disoriented. Poirot stood at the foot of her bed, his gaze fixed not on her but on the bedside table where the tea tray had been placed. He examined the cup, the teapot, and the small silver sugar bowl. Then he sniffed delicately at the teapot spout. His nose wrinkled. Ah, he murmured. A faint odour of almonds, masked beneath the bergamot of the tea. The same note as before. Hastings looked anxious. Do you think she was the intended victim? Poirot smiled gently. No, Hastings. Not intended, merely convenient. The poison was placed where any might partake. The true object was confusion. Finch frowned. You mean it was planted simply to frighten? To mislead, Poirot corrected. Each of us drinks tea in this house, do we not? If suspicion becomes scattered, truth hides more easily. He turned to Hastings. My friend, let us list who was in the breakfast room this afternoon. Vera was there first, Hastings recalled. I saw her reading by the window when I passed through. Charles came in soon after, poured himself a cup, and left almost at once. Then Madame Lefevre came in. I don't remember seeing anyone else. Très bien. Then one of those three placed the poison, or perhaps, one was meant to take it. Poirot walked to the window, gazing out thoughtfully. Lady Winthrop feared someone close to her. Vera mentioned that she wished to change her will. Suppose she had indeed done so. Who, then, gains or loses by her death? Charles gains everything, Hastings said immediately. Exactly, murmured Poirot. And yet, consider, Charles smokes heavily, lives beyond his means, and quarrelled often with his mother. Too obvious, perhaps. Then Vera. She gains nothing, Hastings. Unless her aunt's death freed her from shame or secrecy. But shame, yes, that word she used, it returns again and again. Something shameful hidden in this family. That evening, Madame Lefevre regained consciousness. Poirot was at her side the moment she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened. Madam, he said softly, you are safe. Do you remember what happened? She frowned weakly. I drank my tea, then pain, a burning in the throat. Did you prepare the tea yourself? No. It was already poured. I thought Vera had made it. She said it was fresh. Poirot nodded slightly. I see. Tell me, madam, before you fainted, did you notice anyone enter the room? Her eyes closed briefly, then opened again. Yes. Charles. He came back, said he had forgotten his lighter. He picked something up from the table and left. Merci, madam. Rest now. You have been most brave. Poirot stepped outside, where Hastings waited. Well. She remembers Charles returning for his lighter, Poirot said quietly. Yet there is one flaw. He smokes cigarettes, no lighter, only matches. I observed it myself this morning. Hastings frowned. Then he lied about his reason for returning. Or someone wished it to seem he returned, said Poirot. We must look beyond actions to motive. Remember, Hastings, Lady Winthrop's letter, hidden so carefully. Someone feared exposure, not inheritance. Late that night, Poirot sat alone in the library. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the shelves. On the desk before him lay Finch's notes, the half-finished letter, and a small vial of perfume, the sample recovered from the broken bottle. He uncorked it, holding it beneath his nose. The scent was delicate, haunting, jasmine, bergamot, and a faint trace of bitter almond. He whispered to himself, the murderer is an artist, blending scents and poisons alike. But even the finest artist leaves an unbalanced note. He dipped a strip of paper into the perfume, then folded it carefully. There is a missing element here, Hastings, a note too harsh for perfume, too precise for chance. When I find it, we shall know our killer. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Vera Drayton. She entered hesitantly, her face pale, eyes anxious. I had to speak to you, she said. I can't bear this any longer. Charles is growing desperate. He thinks Finch suspects him. And do you suspect him, mademoiselle? She hesitated. He quarrelled with Aunt Beatrice about money. But murder? No. He's reckless, not cruel. Poirot watched her carefully. And yet, he lied about his lighter. She bit her lip. He told me he went back for something else, but begged me not to say what. Ah, said Poirot softly. And what was that something? Her eyes filled with tears. A letter. He said it was private. I thought it might have been from his fiancée in London. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Or from Lady Winthrop herself. Perhaps the missing letter that once lay upon her desk. Vera looked stricken. Do you think he took it? Poirot rose, his eyes gleaming. I think, mademoiselle, that the letter he took was worth killing for. He turned to the fire, the faint scent of jasmine rising around him like a ghost. Twice the perfume has killed, he murmured. Once in truth, once in warning. The third time, Hastings, it will reveal the hand that poured it. Chapter 6, Poirot sets the trap. The following morning broke with a chill rain that swept across the moors, drumming softly upon the tall windows of Thornleigh Manor. The mist rolled low and silver, cloaking the gardens in a veil of secrecy. It was, Poirot thought, a fitting day for lies to come undone. Inspector Finch had stationed a constable at the main gate and forbade anyone to leave. The guests, if they could still be called that, moved about the house like shadows. Even the servants had taken to whispering in corners, their faces pale. Poirot, however, seemed entirely untroubled. He appeared at breakfast immaculate as always, his grey suit faultless, his moustache gleaming with precision. He ate a single boiled egg, sipped his coffee, and conversed lightly about the weather, while the others watched him with wary eyes. Madame Lefevre will recover, he announced, dabbing his lips with a napkin. She is weak, yes, but the danger has passed. A most fortunate woman. Vera Drayton nodded, though her expression remained tense. Do you think she was truly the target, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Perhaps, mademoiselle. Or perhaps she merely stood in the way of a plan meant for another. Charles Winthrop looked up sharply. Are we to live like prisoners in our own home while you spin theories, Poirot? If Finch means to accuse me, let him do so openly. Poirot smiled gently. Mon cher monsieur, patience. The truth, it ripens like fruit. Pluck it too early, and it turns bitter. Charles rose, muttering under his breath, and left the room. Vera followed him with her eyes, worry written across her pale face. When the door had closed, Poirot turned to Hastings. You observe, mon ami, how the guilty man grows impatient, while the innocent grows fearful. Both reveal themselves, but in different ways. Hastings frowned. You still think Charles guilty, then? Poirot raised a finger. I think, Hastings, that Charles is the key, but not necessarily the hand that struck. There is more to this little family than meets the eye. Later that morning, Poirot requested that all the guests assemble in the drawing room. The rain beat steadily against the glass, and the fire hissed in the hearth. One by one, they gathered: Charles, Vera, Madame Lefevre, looking pale but defiant, Dr. Selby, and Inspector Finch. Poirot stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice calm and deliberate. My friends, he began, we are gathered here because the shadow of death still lies upon this house. Lady Winthrop's murderer is among us, and though he, or she, has been clever, the time for cleverness is over. There was a collective stir. Charles gave a short, bitter laugh. You make it sound like a stage play. Ah, my's OUI. Poirot smiled. Life itself, Monsieur Winthrop, is the most dramatic play of all. And in this play, we near the final act. He walked slowly around the room, speaking as he moved. Lady Winthrop was poisoned with methyl cyanide, a poison hidden in a perfume. Only one among us could have prepared such a thing. Madame Lefevre. Madame Lefevre gasped. You accuse me? Non, madame. Poirot raised a hand. You are an artist, not a murderer. But your art was used by another. You gave Lady Winthrop a sample of your new scent, yes? Yes, she said shakily. I swear it was harmless. Poirot nodded. And yet, someone tampered with that vial before Lady Winthrop opened it. Who had access? Inspector Finch cleared his throat. Her maid, of course. And any of the family. Precisely, said Poirot. But the maid is innocent, she was with Dr. Selby when the bell rang that morning. So, the field narrows. Now, let us consider motive. He paused, letting the silence stretch. The rain beat harder against the windows. Lady Winthrop intended to change her will, Poirot continued. She wrote a letter to the police, one we found hidden beneath her desk blotter. Why was it hidden instead of destroyed? Because the murderer was interrupted before he could finish his work. Someone entered unexpectedly. Vera Drayton's hands tightened around her handkerchief. Who? Poirot looked at her with grave gentleness. You, mademoiselle. You came to the library that morning, did you not? She started. Yes, but only to fetch a book. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactly. You entered, saw Lady Winthrop already dead, and fled in shock. The murderer, hidden nearby, had no chance to destroy the letter. Instead, he concealed it. Charles surged to his feet. This is nonsense. You can't accuse Vera, she adored my mother. Poirot turned sharply. Sit down, monsieur. I accuse no one, yet. I merely observe. He moved to the fireplace, warming his hands. Let us speak of the second poisoning, the tea incident. A reckless act, yes, but revealing. Madame Lefevre nearly died, yet she was not the intended victim. The poison was meant for another cup, the one poured first. Finch looked up. Whose cup was that? Poirot smiled faintly. Vera Drayton's. A gasp ran around the room. Vera's eyes widened. Mine? Yes, mademoiselle. The killer feared you had seen something, or knew something. Perhaps you spoke without realizing. And so, he tried to silence you. She looked stricken. But, then who did it? Poirot stepped closer, his voice low but clear. The one person who could reach both Lady Winthrop's perfume and your tea. the one who moves freely through this house unremarked. Dr. Selby. The old man drew himself up, indignant. This is preposterous. I was Lady Winthrop's physician, her friend. Poirot nodded gently. Indeed. And her confessor. You knew of her heart weakness, her medications, her fears. You also knew of the letter she was writing, for she told you she could no longer protect someone. Was it you she meant, Doctor? Dr. Selby's face blanched. No. She misunderstood. Ah, said Poirot softly, then you do know what she discovered. The silence was electric. Finch's pen scratched hastily against his notebook. Poirot went on, his tone almost kind. Lady Winthrop learned that her late husband's fortune had been mishandled by you. You invested it foolishly, lost thousands, and concealed it with forged statements. She intended to expose you. You, who had been her husband's closest friend. Dr. Selby's lips trembled. I meant to repay her, I only needed time. So you decided, Poirot continued inexorably, to silence her instead. You used Madame Lefever's perfume, knowing she would be blamed. And when Vera stumbled too close to the truth, you struck again. Selby sagged into a chair, face grey. It wasn't supposed to kill her, he muttered. Just make her ill, frighten her into keeping silent. Finch stood abruptly. Good God, man! Do you admit it? Selby buried his face in his hands. Yes. She threatened to ruin me. I'd lost everything. I couldn't bear the shame. Poirot bowed his head briefly. You see, Hastings, the word returns. Shame. The very thing Lady Winthrop mentioned before her death. Outside, the rain softened into a whisper. Poirot turned toward the window, gazing out across the misted lawn. It is done, he said quietly. The perfume of death fades, but its memory lingers. Vera rose, tears glinting in her eyes. You've saved us, Monsieur Poirot. He smiled gently. Non, mademoiselle. I have only listened to the whispers of truth. It is always there, waiting, if one uses the little grey cells. Charles stood silent, head bowed, as Finch led the doctor away. When they were gone, Hastings exhaled deeply. You knew all along, didn't you, Poirot? Poirot's eyes twinkled. My friend. From the moment I smelled the perfume, I knew the killer was not a woman. The scent of deceit, it was too heavy, too deliberate. A man's hand had mixed it. He looked once more toward the rain-washed gardens. Now, Hastings, perhaps at last Thornleigh Manor will be at peace. Chapter 7, The False Confession. Rain lashed the windows through the night, a relentless whisper against the stone walls of Thornleigh Manor. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sullen grey sky and air that smelled faintly of damp earth and regret. The household woke to uneasy quiet. Dr. Selby had been taken to the village station under guard, and Inspector Finch had departed with him to formalize the confession. For the first time in days, Thornleigh was almost peaceful. Almost. Poirot, however, looked anything but satisfied. He sat at the breakfast table, untouched toast before him, his eyes distant and thoughtful. Hastings, observing him from across the room, knew that expression well. You're not convinced, are you? Hastings ventured. Poirot glanced up, his moustache twitching. My friend, it is a dangerous thing to be too easily satisfied. The confession, it is too neat. Too complete. And the criminal, Hastings, he is rarely so obliging. But Selby admitted everything. He even explained how he tampered with the perfume vial. Just so. He explained with great precision, perhaps too great. Yet one small detail troubles me. He rose, pacing lightly. Lady Winthrop died instantly, before she could call for help. The poison entered through the skin, yes, but the dosage must have been exact. Could a man of 70, with trembling hands, mix such a precise concentration? Non, mon ami. It requires delicacy, finesse, skills of an artist, or a perfumer. Hastings frowned. You mean Madame Lefevre? Poirot smiled faintly. I mean, perhaps, that the good doctor was not alone. As the morning wore on, Poirot requested that no one leave the house until Finch's return. The order caused some grumbling, particularly from Charles, who paced the drawing-room like a caged animal, but Poirot's calm authority left no room for argument. By mid-afternoon, Vera Drayton appeared at the library door, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly, I had to speak with you. I can't rest. Even with the doctor gone, there's something that doesn't feel right. Poirot gestured to a chair. Please, mademoiselle. Sit. Tell me what troubles you. She hesitated, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. It's Charles. He's changed since yesterday. He barely speaks, he avoids everyone, and this morning I saw him burning papers in the fireplace of his room. Tiens. Burning papers? Poirot leaned forward slightly. And did you happen to see what kind of papers? She shook her head. No. But he looked frightened. Not angry, not guilty, but frightened. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Interesting. Fear, you see, is rarely misplaced. It always points to something real. He stood. Come, mademoiselle. We shall take a little walk. The corridor outside Charles's room was silent. Poirot knocked politely, and after a moment, a curt voice answered, Who is it? It is I, Hercule Poirot. May I enter? There was a pause, then the door opened a few inches. Charles stood there, dishevelled, unshaven, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. What do you want now? He muttered. Poirot stepped inside without waiting for permission. The air smelled faintly of smoke and whiskey. On the hearth lay the blackened remains of several papers. Poirot bent over them delicately, sifting with the tip of a pencil. Burned letters, he murmured. But look, Hastings, one corner survives. The handwriting, feminine, elegant. The ink fresh. He straightened and looked at Charles. You were burning your mother's letters. Charles stiffened. No. They were old bills, nothing important. Ah, mais non, monsieur. You lie? The truth, always it has a particular scent. Yours, it smells of fear. Charles's face flushed. You can believe what you like. I've told the police everything I know. Poirot's voice softened. Then perhaps you will indulge me one small question. Did your mother know of any financial trouble Dr. Selby was in? Charles hesitated. She mentioned once that he'd lost money in some investment. But she wasn't angry, only disappointed. Then why, said Poirot quietly, was she writing a letter to the police? Charles said nothing. He turned away, shoulders rigid. Poirot watched him for a long moment. Then, gently, Monsieur, if you wish to protect someone, you must be careful not to destroy yourself in the attempt. Charles looked sharply at him. What do you mean? Only this, said Poirot. A false confession is like perfume, it covers the odour of guilt, but never for long. That evening, Finch returned to Thornleigh Manor, weary and wet from travel. He found Poirot waiting in the library, the fire burning low. Well, Finch said, hanging up his coat, we've got Selby locked up. He's confessed, signed the statement, and even told us where he bought the chemicals. I'd say the case is closed. Poirot smiled politely. Closed, yes, but not concluded. Finch groaned. What now? You're not telling me the confession's false? Poirot inclined his head. Inspector, tell me, did Dr. Selby describe precisely how he poisoned the perfume? Yes. He said he used a syringe to inject the cyanide mixture through the cork of the vial. Ah, said Poirot softly, then he is a fool or a liar. The cork was intact when Lady Winthrop opened it. I examined it myself. There was no puncture. Finch stared. But then how? Precisely, murmured Poirot. How indeed? Unless someone else prepared it entirely. He leaned forward. Dr. Selby's confession protects another. Someone younger, more desperate, and closer to Lady Winthrop's heart. Finch's eyes widened. You mean, Charles? Poirot spread his hands. Or perhaps one who loved Charles too dearly. Vera. The name hung unspoken between them. Finch frowned. She doesn't seem the type. Poirot smiled faintly. There is no type, my friend. Love and fear, they make of any person a stranger to themselves. That night, Poirot sat alone before the fire, his thoughts moving in quiet precision. He took from his pocket the small glass vial recovered from Lady Winthrop's desk. Empty now, but faint traces of the perfume still lingered. He held it close to the firelight, turning it slowly. Then, with sudden satisfaction, he saw it, a tiny smudge near the neck, a residue of lipstick, faint, but unmistakable. Lipstick, he murmured. Not Lady Winthrop's shade, hers was coral pink. This, Hastings, is darker, crimson. The colour worn by. He stopped, for Hastings was not there. But the name came easily. Mademoiselle Vera Drayton. Poirot replaced the vial and leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming. So, it was you, was it? The dutiful niece, the quiet soul. And poor Selby, he sacrificed himself to save you. Mon Dieu, what fools we make of those who love us. The next morning, Thornleigh Manor stirred with subdued activity. Poirot moved with calm deliberation, every gesture deliberate, every word chosen with care. At luncheon, he turned to Hastings with that familiar little smile. The final act approaches, mon ami. Tonight, after dinner, we shall invite our friends once more to the drawing room. It is time that the last mask fell. Hastings frowned. You're sure, Poirot? Quite sure. I can smell the truth now, it lingers like perfume long after the wearer has gone. The murderer has walked among us every day, wearing innocence like a cloak. He rose, smoothing his waistcoat. But this evening, Hastings, we shall lift that cloak and reveal the scent beneath. He paused at the door, glancing back over his shoulder with that familiar twinkle. Tell me, mon ami, he said softly, have you ever noticed how the most delicate fragrance can conceal the deadliest poison? Chapter 8, The Fragrance of Truth. Evening descended over Thornleigh Manor like a soft velvet curtain. The air was still after the day's rain, and faint wisps of mist curled above the garden lawns. Inside, the drawing room glowed with golden lamplight, a fire crackling in the hearth. One by one, the household assembled as Poirot had requested, Charles Winthrop, pale and tight-lipped, Vera Drayton, her composure brittle, Madame Lefevre, wrapped in a shawl, and Inspector Finch, notebook in hand. Hastings stood discreetly by the mantelpiece, watching Poirot's every movement with a mix of admiration and unease. Poirot stood before the fire, his hands folded, his expression serene. He waited until the silence had deepened, then spoke in his gentle, deliberate way. My friends, we have travelled a long road together, n'est-ce pas? The death of Lady Winthrop shocked us all. The confession of Dr. Selby seemed to close the matter. And yet, something remained. How do you English say are not quite tidy? Finch frowned. You mean the confession was false? Poirot inclined his head. False in part, true in spirit. The good doctor did indeed know of the crime and even shielded the criminal. But he was not, himself, the murderer. A murmur rippled through the room. Charles stiffened. Vera looked quickly at Poirot, then down at her hands. Poirot began to pace slowly before the fire. Let us review, calmly, the sequence of events. Lady Winthrop received from Madame Lefevre a sample of perfume et amour défendu, a new scent still in creation. It was pure, harmless. But someone tampered with it, replacing the delicate essence with one laced with methyl cyanide. A cruel, subtle method. Lady Winthrop opened the vial, the vapour entered her lungs, and within moments, she was gone. He turned toward Madame Lefevre, who trembled slightly. Madam, your reputation was nearly destroyed. The poison was hidden in your creation, and all assumed the hand that mixed it must be yours. But I found, from the very beginning, one flaw in that assumption, the cork. It was unbroken. The vial had been refilled, yes, but before it was sealed. He paused, letting the word settle. Therefore, only the person who handled the perfume before it reached Lady Winthrop could have poisoned it. That person was the one who delivered it, Vera Drayton. All eyes turned. Vera gasped. That's not true. I only carried it upstairs. Precisely, mademoiselle, said Poirot gently. You carried it upstairs, after adding the poison. Charles sprang up. That's absurd. She would never. Poirot raised a hand. Sit, if you please. I do not accuse without reason. He took a small glass vial from his pocket, the same Lady Winthrop had used, and held it to the light. You see this faint smudge? Lipstick. Not Lady Winthrop's shade. Hers was a pale coral. This, however, is deep crimson, the shade worn by you, Mademoiselle Drayton. Vera's face drained of colour. It must have transferred when you closed the vial after tampering with it, Poirot finished softly. And there is more. Dr. Selby's confession, so conveniently detailed, was a shield. He sacrificed himself to protect you, the woman he saw as an innocent child under Lady Winthrop's control. Vera's breath came quick and shallow. He wasn't protecting me. I didn't even know what he was doing. Ah, murmured Poirot, but you did, n'est-ce pas? You visited him the night before Lady Winthrop's death. You told him your aunt meant to change her will, to cut Charles from his inheritance, and you with him. The doctor pitied you both. He promised to speak to Lady Winthrop on your behalf. But you had other ideas. Tears welled in her eyes. You can't prove any of this. Poirot's voice softened, but his eyes were relentless. My dear mademoiselle, I do not wish to prove it. I merely show you what already exists. You see, when the vial was delivered, you asked Madame Lefevre for a little tissue paper to wrap it. You claimed it was to make the gift appear special. But that tissue, found later in your dressing table drawer, bore traces of the same poison. Vera pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Finch's pen scratched furiously in his notebook. Good Lord, he muttered. You're saying she... Poirot turned to him, calm as ever. Yes, Inspector. It was she who mixed the poison. Dr. Selby discovered the truth afterward. His confession was a desperate attempt to protect her. Charles took a step toward Vera. Is this true? Tell him it isn't. She met his eyes, and something in her gaze broke. I didn't mean to kill her, she whispered. I only wanted to frighten her, to make her ill, so she'd stop tormenting us. She treated me like a servant, even after all I'd done for her. I thought, if she believed she was dying, she'd soften, she'd see how unhappy we were. Poirot bowed his head gravely. But poison, mademoiselle, it has no sympathy. It kills with precision. Vera's shoulders shook. When she fell, I panicked. I wanted to confess, but Dr. Selby stopped me. He said he'd take the blame. He said it was his duty. Charles covered his face with his hands. My God. Poirot's tone was almost kind. He loved you, you see. Not as a man loves a woman, but as a father pities his lost child. The room was silent except for the hiss of the fire. Finch closed his notebook, his expression grim. Miss Drayton, I must ask you to come with me. Vera rose unsteadily. Yes, she whispered. It's over. Poirot moved closer. Mademoiselle, you are young, and you have done a terrible thing. But remember this, the truth, though painful, is also merciful. It ends the poison of lies. She gave him a faint, broken smile before turning to follow Finch from the room. The door closed softly behind them. For a long while, the room remained silent. The fire crackled, the rain resumed its faint tapping at the windows. At last, Charles spoke, his voice hoarse. She wasn't evil, Poirot. Only desperate. My mother, she could make anyone feel small. Poirot nodded. Yes. There is tragedy in that. Lady Winthrop wielded control like a weapon. And in the end, it turned against her. Charles sank into a chair. I thought the perfume smelled so beautiful that morning. I remember saying so. Poirot gave a sad little smile. Beauty, monsieur, has deceived more men than lies ever could. He walked to the window, gazing out at the mist. The perfume et amour défendu, the forbidden love. How apt a name. The scent that promised affection, yet carried death. Hastings spoke quietly. You've done it again, Poirot. But it's a grim victory. Poirot sighed. Mais ouï, Hastings. There is no joy in truth when it arrives too late. He turned back toward the fire. Yet one must bring order, always. It is my duty, to the dead, and to the living. He glanced at the empty chair where Vera had sat moments before. In every crime, my friend, there is not merely wickedness but pain. Remember that. Outside, the rain eased once more, and a faint breeze stirred the curtains. Poirot stood very still, listening to the quiet house settling into uneasy peace. Come, Hastings, he said softly. It is finished. The scent fades at last.